Earlier this year, I was fortunate enough to attend PAX East, where I was able to play a bunch of games. One of my favorite indies I got to play there was Panzer Paladin, made by the team at Tribute Games, makers of Mercenary Kings and Flinthook, two games I personally enjoyed. In my preview of it, I praised Panzer Paladin for its inspirations from the MegaMan franchise, gorgeous pixel art style, and its unique weapon system. In the demo, I was only allowed to play the first stage, but I'm happy to say that the game is finally out on Steam and Switch. So, does the finished version live up to my original hype? Full disclosure, I had a game code provided to me by Tribute Games, so take this review with a grain of salt if you don't want to trust me. Panzer Paladin is a side-scrolling action game, but what makes it unique is its weapon system. When you load the game up for the first time, you're armed with just your mech's fist, but very quickly you start to acquire weapons. The game's developers claim there are over 100 of them in the game, and I believe it. I was constantly encountering new weapons as I went along. Now, obviously, each of them offer a distinct visual, but they also come with individual stats. The most important two are going to be the weapon's size and damage. The size influences its range and hitbox. Obviously, longer weapons are going to allow you to attack farther, but wider weapons can also hit enemies you'd normally have to crouch to hit. And damage, well, does more damage. Most of the time, this isn't super important, as most enemies die in 1 or 2 hits, but you'll want to save your stronger weapons for bigger enemies and bosses in particular. Another thing you'll have to take into account is the weapon's durability. Now, before you start having PTSD flashbacks to your weapons constantly breaking in Breath of the Wild, let me just say that I think it works a lot better here. Since your weapons can break, it forces you to experiment with a wide variety, and play smart with what you have. Plus, the game throws so many weapons at you, you're never really running out. Perhaps one of the most interesting things each weapon has is a special ability that occurs when you break them. At any point, you can choose to snap your weapon in half, breaking it forever, but granting you a boost. Some of these are as simple as you heal a tiny bit, while others can give you a momentary boost to your attack damage, and some of them are as cool as you can literally fly or your weapons shoot projectiles now. Most of the rarer abilities are tied to some of the weapons you get for defeating bosses, which is an excellent segue into the next section. Much like the MegaMan series, this game drops you into a world map where you can choose whichever level you'd like to go to in any order. Unlike MegaMan, none of the bosses have a particular weakness, so there isn't a secret order to defeating them, or at least none that I'm aware of. When you get to the end of a level, you get a warning screen and see the boss's health bar fill up, and you're left to your own devices. I really liked a lot of the designs for these bosses. The enemy faction in the game is a group of demons from space who have a certain penchant for weapons, and with you traveling all over the world, a lot of them are tied to the mythology of each region. For example, in Egypt you fight Anubis wielding a staff. In Russia you fight the Baba Yaga, who rides in a giant mortar and wields a giant pestle.
Baba Yaga, the witch. They tell stories to children to frighten them. You know Baba Yaga?
These fights are mostly hits, with some misses. Some of them don't actually wield weapons at all, which seems like an odd choice considering how they went out of their way to make others have some. Take the boss of Japan, who is a giant skeleton that tries to smash you with its hands and blast you with energy. Sure, when you beat him, you get one of his bones as a weapon, which is cool, but I might have liked to have seen a weapon worked in with his design. Also, the boss from Mexico was crazy easy. He was barely able to get off an attack. I pretty much just button mashed to win. However, I do want to give a shout out to the boss fight from Greece, which was Medusa, because it had a completely unique mechanic, in that she could petrify your mech, forcing you to jump out of it and break apart the stone before hopping back in. All the while, she's summoning snakes to attack you. Oh, sorry, one of the cool things I forgot to mention was that you can actually jump out of your mech at any point in time and go on foot. This is a really cool mechanic that is mostly used well. Each level has a segment where you have to do so. Sometimes this is really fun, as you move a little faster on foot and you can use your whip to swing from hooks, but you sacrifice some damage and you have very little HP. Most of the time, these sections are a fun break from the normal gameplay, but sometimes they put a ton of pits or spikes in these sections which will instantly kill you. This can become very frustrating. Some of these areas feel really long, and considering that the large majority of my deaths in my whole playthrough were some of these instantaneous ones, they felt really cheap. And losing minutes worth of progress on a level was aggravating beyond belief. One thing I loved about the tiny pilot mechanic though, is that if the mech's HP drops to 0, you jump out and can continue playing on foot. In fact, there were actually a couple of bosses that I was able to just barely eke out a win on, and those moments felt incredible. Each level has 2 checkpoints. One right before the mini-boss, who is always this horseman. He's really just a horse with arms. Call him a 10%ar. You may or may not fight him every level. He always shows up to this little melody, very reminiscent of Proto Man. And when you beat him, he gives you a rare weapon to use for the rest of the stage. One really cool thing that Panzer Paladin does is it lets you create your own weapons. These then get uploaded to an online database, and you can randomly find legendary weapons that you and other people have created. Granted, I'm sure it's only a matter of time until we start getting some not safe for work weapons, but hey, it's a really cool system that actually works really well. My biggest gripe with the Horseman is that his fight never really changes. He doesn't get stronger over the course of the game, and for reasons I'll discuss in a bit, I had to fight him 15 times. Eventually, by the end of the game, I was so used to his attack patterns that I could just dodge all his moves and crush him no problem. It actually became tedious to kick his butt. The other checkpoint in each level is right before the boss. One thing I love about these checkpoints is in order to use them, you have to give up one of your weapons. Now, most of the time I didn't have a problem with this, because I would tend to have a burner weapon on me, but sometimes it was a tough decision, because I'd like to break one of them to get a power boost going into the boss fight, but that combined with activating the checkpoint would only leave me with 2 weapons. This mechanic reminded me very much of Shovel Knight. In that game you can choose to not take the checkpoint and get a small reward. It was only until 5 levels into Panzer Paladin that I realized you could hit pause and trade your weapons in and out from your surplus at any point in time. Once I realized this, I would just grab one of my crappy weapons I was never going to use and drop that in to get the checkpoint. This leads me into talking about some of the problems I have with the game in regards to what it tells you, or rather, what it doesn't tell you. The tutorial stage is actually really well constructed. You're able to learn everything you need to control yourself without having to stop and read any text boxes. And it really does feel very intuitive. But I had no idea you could swap out weapons until I was about halfway through the main stages. Now, you could argue that I'm just an idiot for not checking the right half of the pause screen, but I completed the whole game and I still had no idea what the burden stat meant until I reached out to the developers to ask them. At first I thought it meant how heavy the weapon was and affected your attack speed. But it turns out if the burden of all your stored weapons is too high, this causes you to take more damage, makes the Horseman always challenge you in the middle of each stage, and gives the bosses more HP. I had no idea this was even happening, until later in the game when I had a huge stockpile of weapons and I noticed this message. But here's the thing, even knowing this, it's still kind of frustrating, because while you can sacrifice weapons to increase your max health, you can only do this 5 times. And I had a fully maxed out health bar by the end of the 6th level. The only other way to get rid of weapons after this is to manually pull them from your inventory and break them one by one. I didn't do this, so I finished the game with a really high burden and a ton of dirks. Really quick, let's talk about the level design. The 10 levels at the start are all very diverse and fun, except for Tanzania. This level is like a combination of all of my least favorite things in a side-scrolling action game. After a fairly lengthy section at the start, you have to go on this long elevator sequence. Timing it out, it takes 1 minute and 50 seconds to reach the top. After this, it would be nice to get a checkpoint, but instead you have a section where you have to swing across a ton of pits. If you die here, you have to do the whole elevator again. This was the only level that I had to put down and come back to. After you beat all of the 10 levels, the game essentially gives you its version of Wily's Castle, and it is a gauntlet of difficult stages, most of which were made difficult by the inclusion of more bottomless pits. These levels were very trying, and I almost gave up. A lot of them exemplify what frustrated me most about the game, and it's just the sheer amount of instant deaths the game throws at you. Like I said, you're able to trade in your weapons to increase your max HP, but it doesn't help you when most of your deaths will be from falling in a pit or dying while controlling the fragile pilot. Honestly, I think most of my frustrations could be fixed by simply adding 1 or 2 more checkpoints per level. Just like in Shovel Knight, you wouldn't have to use them, but for the players who struggle with these sections, losing so much progress and having to go back and run over these death pits again is a pretty punishing experience. But as long as you can get past some of these frustrations, I personally really enjoyed my time with Panzer Paladin. The pixel art is beautiful. I love how most of the enemies are all one color for each level to help them pop against the backgrounds. The weapon system is really cool. Most of the bosses are well designed and fun, and even though some of the levels run a little long and feature sections that can instantly kill you, when the game plays to its strengths, it's an awesome experience. Swapping weapons to have a strong lineup, breaking the right one at the right time to gain an advantage, and most of the moment-to-moment gameplay is super enjoyable. It's a fun retro-style romp that reminds me a lot of Game Boy Color games. In total, your first playthrough will probably take about 6 hours, or less if you don't manage to fall in as many pits as I did. The game also comes with online leaderboards built in for speedrunning, and I suspect this game will be able to build up a community for it. If you want to pick this game up on Steam, I'd say go for it. But if you have the Switch, I think this game will be much more at home on the portable console. Thank you very much for watching our video review of Panzer Paladin. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and maybe even subscribing to the channel. And while you're at it, why don't you head over to our Twitch channel, where we do a weekly gaming news talk show and a bi-weekly show about our gaming opinions. And if you're on the lookout for a more positive gaming community, consider joining our Discord. All of these will be linked down below. But once again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a wonderful day.